And now Jill Reich.
Oops. Well, I'd had a boring life, so I can go quickly. I started in undergraduate school. I started working as a research assistant for a psychologist, and that became so exciting to me. I've only ever had one undergraduate psychology course. I took introductory psych, and I hated it. So I kept doing this research, and what was really important is that this person, he was in the decision science lab that was part of MIT and the Air Force, and it was the first time I ever felt like my ideas were taken seriously and we were doing something important. And whatever it is he did, I wanted to do too. So I wasn't sure about psychology. I took introductory psych. I hated it, so I didn't change out of my English literature major. When I finished college, I decided, it was a long time ago. It was the end of the 60s and the beginning of the 70s, and lots of controversy politically in the United States. So I decided, I'm out of here. I don't want to be here anymore. And I went marching off to Switzerland, not having done my homework, but liking to ski a lot. And I arrived there. Women did not have the right to vote. In order to open a bank account, I needed my father's signature. I wondered why my parents weren't upset that I was going to Switzerland, but it was even more conservative than they were. So I was going to stay a year. I stayed. I had promised myself I would get my degree, my PhD. I was going to go on in psychology, and I promised myself I'd do that before I was 30. And that was the only goal I had, other than to ski and find a job to keep myself together. Found a job teaching English as a second language, and stayed there for I stayed there for 4 years, and then I realized if I were really going to get my degree before I was 30, I had to get going. So I came back to graduate school and had a pretty traditional graduate school experience. I was fortunately very focused on research, which is really how I learned psychology. My emphasis, I'm cognitive psychology with emphasis in developmental. Probably the most important thing I was advised when I was in graduate school is don't think of yourself as a psychologist. Think about what you know and who needs to know it. And switching that was the most important thing that has influenced my career since that time. If I had said, well, psychologists work as teachers and researchers and administrators, which is what I've ended up doing, that would be one thing. But it turned it around, and it opened up the world for me. And so it's true, I have been a pretty traditional faculty member in that sense, but along the way, I've consulted for about almost the whole time I was in Chicago, so for about 15 years with an architectural firm. Well, at that time, psychologists didn't consult with architectural firms, but I got to know this person in the firm, and he invited me to come to his firm. I had done some research using the environment, and he said, come and look what we're doing. And I thought, well, I don't know what you're wanting, but that'll be interesting. I arrived there, and he didn't know what he wanted. But we started talking about how they made design decisions. How do you get the information to make the decision? And he said, his company specialized in courthouses. So I have this little specialty, if you need it, I said, so how did you decide to design it this particular way? And he said, we send out these questionnaires, but no one answers them. Bingo, that's something that we know as psychologists. I said, well, let me take a look at them. They were 20 pages long. The chief judge got the same one as the lowliest custodian. They were mostly a line at the top of the page saying, tell me what you do. And nobody answered it. So anyway, I started working with this firm and spent a lot of time with them. We traveled across the country working with courthouses. We did a project for the state of Maine, so I got to come up here. As Brian said, traveling on somebody else's dime is really fun. But it was that turning it around and saying, what do I know? I worked with them in a lot of different things in terms of communication. Architects are not good at communicating, and so forth. So other than that, I really probably have a pretty traditional career. One of the exciting things, I think, about getting your degree in something like psychology is you can do so many different things. And so with a PhD in psychologist, I've been focused on teaching. Other times I've been very focused on research, had a longitudinal study of high-risk babies. I started all the time as a faculty member. I did that consulting with the architectural firm. I started a Head Start program. I've had the pleasure of being executive director of education at APA and then coming to Bates as the dean, and now returning to my roots and teaching. And so it's been a great career that I can recommend to you all heartily. Thank you.
I'll give my brief story now. My story is about how you can make a lot of mistakes and it all works out well. So it starts when I was... Is it? Oh, good. So, hey, making mistakes, not a bad thing. I guess I'll start all the way back when I was in 7th grade, and I'll only stay there for a moment. When I was in 7th grade, I read a horror trilogy that was set in Maine, and I decided I'm going to live in Maine one day, and I wanted to be a writer, and that was my goal. And then I just started going through life and, being a writer and living in Maine, not very practical, especially when you're from New Jersey. So it didn't fit. And when I got into senior year of college, I was a psychology major and wasn't sure what I was going to do. And in the fall, I suddenly panicked and thought, uh-oh, if I don't apply to grad school, I have to find a job. And so I applied to grad school on a whim right over Thanksgiving break. Mistake number one, you don't do that. You should take some time and really make this a good decision. But instead I applied. And then I got some acceptances, amazingly, and I had a few offers in my hand, but 2 that I was excited about. One was Cornell University and one was Tufts University. And Tufts had this great program, an applied child development program, where I would get to do an internship working on writing and media communications, a big passion of mine. And Cornell, that was a straight doctoral degree in developmental psych. And I had these 2, and all my professors said, it's Cornell, it's Cornell. And I said, I like Tufts, though. It's Cornell. So I went to Cornell. Mistake number 2. So not that Cornell's a bad school, it was the wrong fit for me. I knew very quickly that I shouldn't be there, that I wasn't pursuing what I wanted to pursue. And so I made the difficult decision after a couple of years to leave after my master's degree and not finish the doctorate. And I decided to move to Maine because that was the only thing that I could hold fast to. And then when I moved to Maine, saw some great job offers. One was Bates College, needed someone to teach for a year in the psychology department. And another was a supervisor for individuals who were working with children with autism in the homes. And I applied to both and amazingly got both. And so again, I had this major decision. Do I teach at Bates for a year or do I go and work with children with autism? And Pettingill and the Atrium were just too heady for me. I couldn't turn it down. And so I came to Bates. And at the time, I wasn't sure what to make of that decision. There was a good year that I felt like maybe it was a mistake, that I had let myself, again, kind of be pulled into the academic path that I had just gotten myself out of, and I really wasn't sure that I was doing the right thing. Thankfully, they asked me back another year, and I said, okay, and wasn't sure what I was doing, because I felt like I still wanted to be a writer who lived in Maine. And so my 4th major decision was, well, what do I do next? Do I go find a different full-time job? Being at Bates, could end, it could keep going. I had no idea. And so what I started doing was freelance writing on the side while I was teaching, and teaching a little bit less bit by bit, and doing both of those. And lo and behold, all of my mistakes have turned into my dream job. I now get to teach and advise students, live in Maine, and write. And it is amazing. It's beyond amazing. And so what I take from my whole path, and it is very much a meandering path, is that failure isn't a bad thing. failure gets this horrible rap once we're about beyond the age of about 5. But when you're younger than that, you learn through failure, and we all learn through that. You have to be willing to take risks, make mistakes, quote unquote, because you might look back and say, those were the best decisions I made. And you know what? That's what I say about my 4, quote unquote, mistakes. So there you go. And now I turn it over to Kathy Lowe.
I'll be very brief. I didn't make any mistakes. I just want you to know. I didn't take any undergraduate psych courses. Some of you know I went to Bowdoin. I was pre-med and was pretty sure I'd be a physician, but I was a Russian history and Russian language double major. When I finished, I followed my heart, a boyfriend, to a job in New Hampshire which involved teaching science, because you can get science teaching jobs, but it's very hard to find Russian teaching jobs. So I taught biology, chemistry, math, and human sexuality for a couple of years in a secondary school, a private secondary school. And really just as a sort of filler while I was trying to figure out my romantic life, frankly. And then I went on from there to do a master's because I was interested in counseling. I was working with these high school students in a residential school and seeing lots of psychopathology and not knowing what to do about it. So I went off to do a master's degree, a very quick one. And my romantic life was still playing out in a number of years. That is not something you want to neglect, let me tell you. And then I found a job after finishing a master's at a private school in California where I was hired to help them integrate women. There was a single-sex school that was taking women for the first time. And I became the dean of students. And those of you who went to schools like this know I was in charge of kicking kids out and making sure kids were healthy and other things like that. So student services, really. I did that for 4 years and then decided to go on for a PhD. Actually, I didn't decide that. I should back up. I thought I'd do either an MD or a PhD. I was interested in either psychiatry or psychology. I had never taken a psych course, remember. I had no advisors. My thesis was written in Russian. It wasn't helpful when I was applying to PhD programs. And so I am so lucky that I got into graduate school because I had no idea what I was doing. So I was in California, so I sent applications to the UC schools and to Stanford, just thinking, well, we'll just try a bunch of options here, and managed to get into some of those places, but I also applied to med school. I'd taken the MCAT. And my true confession is that I took multiple graduate school admission tests my senior year of college because I wasn't sure. I took the GMAT, the LSAT, the MCAT, and the GRE. I know, so you can see that I was planning ahead. So I actually applied to med school too, and not knowing anything about applying to graduate school, I was appalled or delighted when in early February these schools started calling and saying, we'd like you to come for a PhD. We'll fund it. I had no idea that happened. So I was like, wow, this is great. They're going to pay for me to go. I hadn't even anticipated that because I didn't have an advisor or any help. And then they said, you have 2 weeks to let us know. And I was like, well, med school doesn't let me know till April, whether I get in or not, or the end of March. So really, it was a miscalculation. I did make a mistake. It was a miscalculation. I just didn't know. I didn't want to wait. I had these great offers. So I think I could have gone either way. I did the PhD program and had a wonderful experience, and I think just stumbled into the right thing. I loved writing. I loved therapy. I wanted to help people. And I loved teaching. I knew that from my previous work in high school. So I just happened into the right thing, and my romantic life also worked out. I just want you to know.